On September 14, 1987, newlyweds disappeared from a luxury resort in Hilton Head, South Carolina, during what should have been the most romantic week of their lives. What initially appeared to be a tragic drowning accident would eventually become one of the most calculated disappearances in American criminal history. The ransom that followed, $950,000, was paid by the bride's wealthy family, desperate to believe their daughter might still be alive. 12 years later, in the summer of 1999, a metal detectorist combing the beaches of Tybee Island, Georgia, made a discovery that would crack open a cold case the FBI had nearly forgotten. Buried 18 inches beneath the sand, wrapped in deteriorating plastic, was a diamond engagement ring. The inscription inside read, "To Michelle, forever yours, 1987. But it wasn't just the ring. Beneath it, investigators would find something far more disturbing. A carefully sealed container holding identification documents, bank records, and a handwritten confession that revealed the truth about what happened that September night. The man who orchestrated it all was Darnell Hayes, the groom himself, and for 12 years, he had been living just 70 miles from where it all began, working as a night janitor at a budget motel in Savannah, Georgia, sleeping in a storage closet, eating vending machine food, and maintaining an existence so invisible that even the people he worked alongside barely knew his name. This is the story of how a man faked his wife's death, collected a fortune, and then trapped himself in a prison of his own making. Too terrified to spend the money, too paranoid to run, and too committed to his disguise to ever reclaim his real life. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Darnell Hayes grew up in North Philadelphia, the second of 4 children in a working-class family that valued education above all else. His father worked double shifts at a textile factory, while his mother cleaned houses in the wealthy suburbs. Darnell was the smart one, the one who would make it out. He earned a partial scholarship to Temple University, where he studied business administration, graduated with honors in 1982, and landed a promising position as an account manager at First Liberty Trust in Philadelphia. By all appearances, Darnell was living the American dream. He wore tailored suits, drove a leased BMW, and dated women from the city's professional class. But beneath the polished exterior, Darnell was drowning. Student loans, car payments, credit card debt, and an expensive apartment in Rittenhouse Square had created a financial pressure cooker. By 1985, he was $67,000 in debt on a $42,000 annual salary. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, juggling minimum payments, and living one emergency away from complete financial collapse. That's when he met Michelle Hartwell at a charity fundraiser in January 1986. She was everything he needed. Beautiful, cultured, and most importantly, wealthy. The Hartwell family owned a chain of furniture stores throughout Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Michelle's father, Robert Hartwell, was worth an estimated $8 million. She worked in the family business, but more as a formality than necessity. Her trust fund alone was worth $400,000. Darnell pursued Michelle with calculated precision. Flowers every week, weekend trips to New York, intimate dinners at the restaurants where Philadelphia's elite dined. He maxed out credit cards to maintain the illusion of wealth, always picking up the check, always suggesting the next adventure. Michelle fell completely in love with the charming, ambitious man who seemed to worship her. They were engaged by November 1986. Robert Hartwell had reservations about the rushed courtship, but Michelle was 28 and determined. The wedding was planned for September 1987 at the Hartwell family estate outside Philadelphia, a lavish affair with 300 guests, a 10-piece orchestra, and champagne flowing like water. But Darnell wasn't thinking about the wedding. He was thinking about what came after. During their engagement, Darnell began researching. He spent hours at the public library, reading about missing persons cases, ransom negotiations, and unsolved disappearances. He studied cases where bodies were never found, where families paid ransoms for loved ones who never came home. He learned about the window of time when hope was strongest, when desperate families would pay anything for the possibility of seeing their loved one again. He also began skimming from his position at First Liberty Trust. Small amounts at first, transferred into accounts under false names. By the time of his wedding, he had stolen $23,000 from the bank, enough to fund the first phase of his plan. He knew his theft would eventually be discovered, but by then, he planned to be someone else entirely. The honeymoon destination was Darnell's suggestion: Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. Romantic, luxurious, but most importantly, remote beaches and strong ocean currents. The Hartwells paid for the trip as a wedding gift. A week at the Palmetto Dunes Resort in a beachfront suite. They arrived on September 12th, 1987. For 2 days, they played the role of blissful newlyweds. They had breakfast on the balcony, walked the beach, made love, and talked about their future. Michelle had no idea she was living the last 48 hours of her life. On the evening of September 14th, Darnell suggested a romantic walk on the beach after dinner. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Other couples strolled nearby, but as they walked further from the resort, the beach grew empty. The sound of waves crashing became the only noise. At approximately 8:47 p.m., when they were alone on a stretch of beach near an old fishing pier, Darnell attacked his wife from behind. He used a climbing rope he had purchased weeks earlier in Philadelphia, stored in his luggage beneath dress shirts and swim trunks. Michelle fought. She clawed at his arms, kicked sand, tried to scream, but Darnell was stronger, and the surprise was absolute. Within 3 minutes, Michelle Hartwell Hayes stopped moving. Darnell dragged her body into the surf. He had studied the tide charts obsessively. High tide was at 9:15 p.m. He weighted her body with a canvas bag filled with rocks he had collected during their previous beach walks, stones Michelle had thought he was gathering as vacation souvenirs. He bound the bag to her waist using rope, then swam her body out past the breakers. The current was strong, exactly as he had researched. He released her in deep water, watching as she sank beneath the black surface. Then he swam back to shore, his heart pounding, his mind racing through the next steps of his plan. He returned to the resort at 9:35 p.m., his clothes and hair wet. He appeared panicked, searching the beach with a flashlight, calling Michelle's name. By 10:03 p.m., he had alerted resort security. By 10:30 p.m., the Beaufort County Sheriff's Department had been notified. By midnight, the Coast Guard had launched a search and rescue operation. Darnell played his role perfectly. He was the devastated husband, sobbing to police about how Michelle had wanted to swim in the moonlight, how he had warned her about the current, how he had tried to save her but couldn't reach her in time. He showed them scratches on his arms, defensive wounds from Michelle's fight that he claimed were from rocks as he searched the surf for her. The search continued for 3 days. Helicopters scanned the coastline, boats dragged the waters. Divers checked the area where Darnell claimed Michelle had gone under. They found nothing, no body, no clothing, no evidence of Michelle Hartwell Hayes except for her sandals on the beach and her husband's testimony. On September 18th, the search was officially called off. The Coast Guard concluded that Michelle had drowned and her body had been carried out to sea by the current. It was officially ruled an accidental death by drowning, body unrecovered. Darnell returned to Philadelphia with an empty casket for the funeral. But Darnell wasn't finished. The hardest part was just beginning. Darnell waited exactly 11 days after the funeral. On October 1st, 1987, Robert Hartwell received a phone call at his office. The voice was disguised, mechanically altered. The message was brief and terrifying. "We have your daughter. She's alive. If you want her back, it will cost $950,000. Wait for instructions. Tell the police and she dies." Robert Hartwell's world exploded. His daughter was alive. The drowning had been staged. Someone had taken Michelle. He immediately called the FBI Special Agent Patricia Monroe of the FBI's Philadelphia field office took over the case. She had handled kidnapping investigations for 12 years and immediately recognized the sophisticated nature of the demand. The amount was specific, not a round number. The contact method was careful. The timing was calculated, coming after the official search had ended and the family's emotional guard was down. The FBI tapped the Hartwell phones and prepared for the next contact. It came 4 days later, a letter delivered to the Hartwell home. The handwriting was block letters, clearly disguised. The letter included a Polaroid photograph of Michelle's necklace, a distinctive piece she had been wearing when she disappeared. The letter demanded the money be prepared in used bills, 50s and 100s, and warned again about police involvement. Robert Hartwell was willing to pay anything. The FBI, however, had serious doubts about Michelle's survival. Agent Monroe privately believed this was an opportunistic scam, someone who had read about the drowning and was exploiting a grieving family. But she couldn't ignore the evidence. The necklace in the photo, the knowledge of specific details about Michelle's disappearance, the sophistication of the approach. What Agent Monroe didn't know was that Darnell Hayes had never left Philadelphia. He had taken a leave of absence from work, citing grief and trauma. He was living in his apartment, making the calls from payphones across the city, writing the letters while wearing gloves, using a camera he had purchased with cash from a pawn shop weeks before the wedding. The Polaroid showed Michelle's necklace because he had taken it from her body before releasing her into the ocean. He had kept several pieces of her jewelry for exactly this purpose. The ransom instructions were delivered on October 15th. The money was to be placed in a duffel bag and deposited in a locker at 30th Street Station, Philadelphia's main train terminal. The locker number would be called in. The key would be taped beneath a specific bench in Rittenhouse Square Park. The exchange would happen during rush hour, when the station was crowded with commuters. The FBI had no choice but to comply while attempting surveillance. Robert Hartwell withdrew $950,000 from various accounts, and the FBI marked bills where possible, though there wasn't enough time for comprehensive marking. On October 22, 1987, at 5:00 p.m., Robert Hartwell placed the duffel bag in locker 247 at 30th Street Station. Darnell picked up the key at 6:30 p.m. during the evening commute rush. He wore a janitor's uniform he had purchased from a workwear store, a baseball cap, and glasses with clear lenses. He blended into the crowd of workers heading home. FBI agents were watching the locker, but in the chaos of rush hour, with hundreds of people moving through the station, their surveillance was compromised. Darnell opened the locker at 7:15 p.m., transferred the money from the duffel to 2 large contractor bags he carried in a maintenance cart, then walked out of the station through a service exit that janitorial staff used. He loaded the bags into a stolen van he had parked 3 blocks away, drove to a storage unit he had rented in Camden, New Jersey under a false name, and transferred the money into a large footlocker. By 9:00 p.m., the FBI realized the money was gone. Despite surveillance, despite their best efforts, someone had walked into one of the busiest train stations in America and walked out with nearly $1 million. The Hartwell family waited for Michelle's return. Days passed, then weeks. No contact came, no release, no body, no evidence. The FBI intensified their investigation, but the trail went cold. Whoever had taken the money had disappeared completely. Robert Hartwell aged 10 years in 6 months. His wife became addicted to sleeping pills. The FBI investigation eventually went from active to cold case status. By early 1988, the painful truth was undeniable. Michelle was almost certainly dead, probably had drowned that night in September, and someone had cruelly scammed the family out of nearly $1 million by exploiting their hope. The FBI suspected Darnell from the beginning. The timing was too perfect, the knowledge too specific, but they had no evidence. Darnell had alibis for several of the payphone calls. He had made some calls using timer devices attached to payphones, technology he had read about in electronics magazines. His fingerprints weren't on the letters. His apartment yielded nothing during a search warrant execution. His finances showed the debt, but no sudden influx of cash. In March 1988, First Liberty Trust discovered Darnell's embezzlement. He was arrested, charged, and eventually convicted of theft. He served 18 months at a minimum security facility, released in October 1989. The FBI believed that embezzlement was connected to the ransom scheme, that Darnell had needed initial funding for his plan, but they could never prove it. When Darnell was released from prison, the FBI watched him closely for months. They monitored his movements, his bank accounts, his contacts. They expected him to eventually access the ransom money, to make a mistake, to show his hand. But Darnell did something they never anticipated. He disappeared into poverty. In November 1989, Darnell Hayes arrived in Savannah, Georgia, on a Greyhound bus with $800 in his pocket. Money he had legitimately saved before prison. The $950,000 remained in the storage unit in Camden, untouched except for one brief visit, where he had removed $15,000 and repackaged the rest in vacuum-sealed bags to protect against humidity. Darnell had realized something during his time in prison. The FBI would never stop watching him. His only chance was to become nobody, to live a life so beneath suspicion, so thoroughly unremarkable, that eventually the surveillance would end and he would be forgotten. He chose Savannah because it was far from Philadelphia, but close enough to eventually access the storage unit if needed. The city had a large transient population, service industry jobs that paid cash, and neighborhoods where people didn't ask questions. He applied for a night janitor position at the Sandpiper Motor Lodge, a budget motel on the outskirts of the city near the highway. The Sandpiper catered to long-haul truckers, tourists on tight budgets, and the occasional affair conducted in anonymous rooms. The manager, a weary man named Dale Hutchins, who had owned the place for 20 years, asked few questions. Darnell gave his real name. He knew fake identification would be more risky than using his actual identity, but claimed he was starting over after a divorce and legal troubles. Dale understood starting over. He paid $5.50 an hour, cash, and didn't require a formal application. Darnell worked midnight to 8 a.m., 6 nights a week. His job was to clean the common areas, mop floors, empty trash, and handle any late-night guest issues. He wore a grey uniform Dale provided, kept his head down, and spoke only when necessary. Dale offered him a deal. If Darnell wanted to save on rent, he could sleep in the supply closet off the laundry room. It was a space meant for cleaning supplies and maintenance equipment, roughly 8 feet by 10 feet, with no windows and a concrete floor. Darnell accepted immediately. He furnished his closet with items scavenged from guest room rejects, a worn mattress, a lamp with a broken shade, a small television with spotty reception, a mini fridge he bought from a pawn shop for $30. He hung his few clothes on a wire rack. He kept his possessions minimal: 3 work uniforms, 2 pairs of jeans, 4 t-shirts, basic toiletries, a radio, some paperback books from the free bin at the public library. His daily routine became a meditation in invisibility. He woke at 11 p.m. in his closet, emerging like a nocturnal creature. He ate dinner from the vending machines, crackers, candy bars, instant noodles prepared in the break room microwave. At midnight, he began his shift. He mopped the lobby floor in slow, methodical strokes. He emptied ashtrays. He wiped down surfaces. He restocked toilet paper in the public restrooms. He occasionally dealt with drunk guests or couples arguing in the parking lot. The other employees barely knew him. Dale's wife Sharon worked the morning desk and would see Darnell leaving as she arrived, exchanging only brief nods. A housekeeper named Rosa worked days and sometimes left Darnell notes about supplies that needed ordering. A maintenance man named Jerome handled repairs and would occasionally work late, sharing coffee with Darnell in comfortable silence. Darnell ate 1 real meal a day, usually lunch at a cheap diner called Maxine's, 2 blocks from the motel. He always ordered the same thing, the daily special and water. The waitresses knew him as the quiet guy who tipped exactly 15% and read the newspaper while he ate. He spent approximately $8 per day on food. His only other expenses were cigarettes, which he had started smoking in prison and now used as a tool for managing stress, and occasional toiletries. He cashed his weekly paychecks at a check cashing store, paying their fees without complaint. He kept his money in a coffee can, hidden behind loose drywall in his closet. He never had more than $400 saved at any time. Just enough for an emergency, not enough to raise suspicion. On Sundays, his day off, Darnell would walk to the public library. He read newspapers from around the country, looking for any mention of the Michelle Hartwell case, any indication the FBI was still investigating. For the first 2 years, there were occasional articles, anniversary pieces about the unsolved drowning and ransom case. He read them with clinical detachment, studying the FBI's theories, learning what they suspected, adjusting his behavior accordingly. He never called anyone from his past. He never contacted family. His mother had died while he was in prison, and his siblings wanted nothing to do with him after his conviction. He had no friends, no romantic interests, no connections to his previous life. He was a ghost living among the living. The psychological toll was immense. Darnell would lie on his mattress during the day, staring at the concrete ceiling of his closet, calculating how long he needed to maintain this life. 5 years? 10 years? Forever? The money sat in Camden, slowly depreciating with inflation, while he ate vending machine food and cleaned other people's messes. There were moments of weakness. In 1992, 3 years into his janitor life, Darnell drove to Camden during a rare 2-day break. He visited the storage unit and counted the money, letting the bills run through his fingers, remembering the life he had abandoned. He took $8,000, telling himself he would spend it carefully, allow himself some small comforts. But the moment he left the storage facility, paranoia consumed him. What if the FBI was watching the storage unit? What if they had traced the rental somehow? He drove straight to a different storage facility in Delaware, rented a new unit under a different false name using fake identification he had purchased, and transferred all the money. He returned to Savannah without spending $1 of the $8,000, which he eventually buried in a waterproof container in a wooded area outside the city. In 1994, a guest at the Sandpiper recognized Darnell's face from an old news report about the embezzlement case. The guest, a truck driver from Pennsylvania, mentioned it casually to Dale. "That janitor of yours, he looks like a guy who stole from a bank up north a couple years back." Dale confronted Darnell, who didn't deny it. He explained he had served his time, was trying to rebuild his life quietly, and just wanted to be left alone. Dale, himself a man with a past he preferred not to discuss, accepted this. "Keep your head down, do your job. We got no problems," Dale said. But the incident terrified Darnell. He dyed his hair, grew a beard, and started wearing glasses, even though his vision was fine. By 1996, 7 years into his janitor life, Darnell had developed a routine so ingrained it was almost pathological. Same breakfast from the vending machine at 11 p.m., peanut butter crackers and a Coke. Same mopping pattern in the lobby. Start at the entrance, work in concentric circles toward the desk. Same lunch at Maxine's, the daily special and water. Same walk to the library on Sundays, south on Montgomery Street, left on Liberty, straight to the Carnegie branch. He timed these walks, and they varied by no more than 3 minutes. He aged poorly. The stress, the poor diet, the night shifts, and the cigarettes turned him gaunt and grey. By his early 40s, he looked 60. His teeth yellowed. His skin took on an unhealthy pallor. He developed a persistent cough that he ignored. Other employees at the Sandpiper stopped seeing him as a person. He was just the night janitor, a fixture of the building, as permanent and unremarkable as the faded wallpaper in the lobby. The isolation nearly broke him multiple times. In 1997, Darnell began experiencing panic attacks. He would wake in his closet, gasping, certain the walls were closing in. He would stand outside in the parking lot at 4 a.m., smoking cigarettes, watching the highway traffic, fighting the urge to walk to the road and keep walking until he reached somewhere new. But where would he go? What would he do? The money was useless to him. Spending it meant exposure. Leaving meant risk. He was trapped in a prison, more secure than any federal facility. A prison of his own paranoia and guilt. In the spring of 1998, a social worker named Keisha Williams came to the Sandpiper investigating complaints about a guest who might be trafficking women. During her visit, she noticed Darnell and became concerned. She thought he was an exploited worker, possibly homeless, possibly being taken advantage of by the motel owner. She approached him in the parking lot, offered him information about social services, shelters, job training programs. Darnell thanked her politely and explained he was fine. He had a job and a place to stay. He didn't need help. But Keisha's kindness affected him deeply. That night, cleaning the lobby, he cried for the first time since prison. He cried for Michelle, for her family, for the man he used to be, for the life he had destroyed. But he didn't turn himself in. The momentum of his deception was too strong. He had lived this lie for so long that it had become his reality. Darnell Hayes, the account manager, the husband, the criminal, that person felt like someone he had read about, not someone he had been. By 1999, the FBI's active surveillance had long since ended. The Michelle Hartwell case was cold, filed away in boxes in a warehouse. Robert Hartwell had died of a heart attack in 1995. Many believed from the broken heart of losing his daughter. Michelle's mother had moved to Florida to live with her sister. The case was remembered only by the agents who had worked it, and even they had moved on to other investigations, other crimes. Darnell had achieved what he wanted. He had become invisible. Nobody was looking for him anymore. But the victory was hollow. He was 53 years old, living in a storage closet, earning minimum wage, with nearly $1 million he could never spend. The money had become a curse, a constant reminder of what he had done and what he could never reclaim. And then, on July 17, 1999, his carefully constructed, invisible life began to unravel because of a decision Michelle's jewelry made 12 years earlier. Dennis Parker was a retired postal worker from Jacksonville, Florida, who had taken up metal detecting as a hobby. Every summer, he and his wife Rita would vacation in Tybee Island, Georgia, spending their days on the beach, and Dennis would spend his mornings sweeping the sand with his metal detector, hoping to find lost jewelry or coins. Most days yielded bottle caps and pull tabs. Occasionally, he would find a ring or a bracelet and would post found items on community boards, hoping to reunite them with their owners. On the morning of July 17, 1999, Dennis was working a section of beach near the old pier. His detector signaled something significant about 18 inches down. He began digging, expecting perhaps a watch or a necklace. What he found was a plastic container, roughly the size of a shoebox, carefully sealed with electrical tape. Inside the container was a diamond engagement ring, a gold necklace, a bracelet, a driver's license in the name of Michelle Hartwell, bank documents, and several pages of handwritten notes. Dennis immediately recognized this was something serious. He called the Tybee Island Police Department. Officer Marcus Reynolds responded to Dennis's call. When he saw the contents of the container, particularly the driver's license dated 1987, he knew this required FBI involvement. The Savannah FBI field office was contacted, and Special Agent David Chen arrived at the beach by early afternoon. The handwritten notes were a partial confession. Darnell had written them in a moment of extreme guilt and paranoia in late 1987, shortly after collecting the ransom. The notes detailed the drowning, the ransom scheme, and the location of Michelle's body, weighted down approximately 3 miles offshore from Hilton Head Island. He had written that if anything happened to him, this container would serve as evidence and confession. He had buried it on Tybee Island, about 70 miles from the actual crime scene, as a kind of insurance policy, or perhaps a subconscious cry to be discovered. What Darnell hadn't anticipated was beach erosion and hurricane activity over 12 years. The container had been buried near a sand dune that had gradually eroded, bringing the container closer to the surface and into the range of metal detectors. Agent Chen ran the driver's license and immediately connected it to the 1987 case. The Michelle Hartwell drowning and ransom case was infamous within the FBI, one of those unsolved cases that agents discussed as an example of a perfect crime that they knew in their gut had been committed by the husband but could never prove. Within hours, a forensics team was processing the scene. The handwriting in the notes was analyzed and compared to known samples of Darnell Hayes' handwriting from his embezzlement trial. It was a match. The jewelry was confirmed through photographs as belonging to Michelle. The bank documents referenced accounts that Darnell had accessed during the ransom operation. On July 18, 1999, FBI agents descended on the Sandpiper Motor Lodge in Savannah, Georgia, looking for Darnell Hayes. Dale Hutchins answered their questions with confusion. Yes, Darnell worked there, had worked there for almost 10 years, lived in the supply closet, was currently sleeping as he worked nights. At exactly 2:00 p.m., agents knocked on the closet door. Darnell answered in his boxer shorts, half awake, thinking maybe there was a problem with one of the motel guests. But when he saw the FBI badges, everything stopped. He didn't run. He didn't argue. He just sat down on his thin mattress, buried his head in his hands, and surrendered. The arrest was quick and quiet. Darnell was read his rights and taken into custody without resistance. When agents searched his small closet room, they found almost nothing. Just a few shirts, a small television, a pack of cigarettes, and a coffee can with $317 in cash. But hidden inside a book was something far more important, a slip of paper with a storage unit number and an address in Delaware. At FBI headquarters, Darnell confessed to everything. No lawyer, no excuses. He detailed the murder, the ransom, and 12 long years of hiding. That note led investigators straight to a storage unit in Delaware. Inside, agents discovered nearly $927,000 in cash, still vacuum sealed, alongside Michelle's wedding ring and several of her personal items. Time had eaten away at some of the bills, but the evidence was clear. Using the confession notes, a dive team returned to the waters off Hilton Head Island. With sonar technology that hadn't existed back in 1987, they found human remains exactly where Darnell had said. DNA confirmed it was Michelle Hartwell Hayes. The rocks and the canvas bag were still there, holding her to the ocean floor. After 12 years, she was finally brought home. Darnell Hayes was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, extortion, and wire fraud. In early 2000, he pled guilty to all charges, accepting life in prison without the chance of parole. The death penalty was taken off the table. The recovered ransom money was returned to the Hartwell family. Michelle's mother, Rebecca, publicly thanked the FBI and said she could finally rest, knowing her daughter had been found. She passed away 6 months later, and many believed she had simply been waiting for that moment of peace. The case soon became a lesson taught at the FBI Academy, a reminder that even the most carefully planned crimes carry their own undoing, and that guilt can become a prison stronger than steel bars. The motel's owner, Dale Hutchins, said he was stunned to learn who Darnell really was. The Sandpiper Motor Lodge became infamous as the murder motel, even though the crime had never happened there. He eventually sold it in 2002, unable to shake the shadow it carried. Darnell's tiny closet room, 8 feet by 10, stood as a symbol of poetic justice. For almost a decade, he had lived trapped in the same kind of confinement he had once sentenced someone else to. In the end, it wasn't the FBI that broke him. It was time, guilt, and the weight of his own choices. Darnell Hayes is currently serving his life sentence at a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania. He rarely receives visitors and spends most of his time in the prison library. In a 2015 interview with a criminal psychology researcher, Darnell reflected on his crime and his years in hiding. People think the hardest part was killing Michelle. It wasn't. The hardest part was every single day after, living in that closet, eating crackers for dinner, knowing I had destroyed everything for money I couldn't use. I gave myself a life sentence years before a judge did. The only difference is, in prison, I can sleep without checking over my shoulder. When asked about the buried confession, Darnell explained that he had written it during a suicidal period in late 1987. He had intended to eventually kill himself, leaving the confession as a way to give Michelle's family closure, but he never found the courage to follow through, and the buried container became another forgotten element of his crime. until beach erosion brought it back to the surface. The case had several lasting impacts on law enforcement procedures. The FBI implemented new protocols for monitoring suspects in ransom cases, recognizing that surveillance needed to extend for longer periods and consider that criminals might deliberately live in poverty to avoid detection. The case was also used in training to emphasize the importance of revisiting cold cases with new technology and methods. For the Tybee Island Police Department, the case brought attention to the importance of taking found items seriously, even when they seem like simple lost property. Officer Reynolds, who first responded to Dennis Parker's call, became an advocate for thorough investigation of unusual discoveries. Dennis Parker, the metal-detecting hobbyist who made the discovery, struggled with the knowledge of what he had found. In interviews, he expressed wish he could have found the container sooner, perhaps saving the Hartwell family years of uncertainty. He continued metal detecting but donated any valuable finds to charity, unable to enjoy the hobby with the same innocence. Michelle's grave, in a cemetery outside Philadelphia, finally received the closure of her actual remains in August 1999. Her headstone includes the dates of her birth, her wedding and her death, all in the same year. 1987, a stark reminder of a life barely begun before it was stolen. The Sandpiper Motor Lodge, under new ownership, was renovated and rebranded. The supply closet where Darnell lived was converted into actual storage space, the mattress and television disposed of. But employees who work there late at night sometimes report an eerie feeling in that space, a coldness that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with memory. The case raises difficult questions about the nature of punishment and freedom. Darnell Hayes spent nearly a decade in voluntary imprisonment, living a life more restricted than many actual prisoners, punishing himself more thoroughly than any court could have. His crime was monstrous. The premeditated murder of a woman who loved him, the cruel exploitation of a grieving family, the 12 years of lies built on top of lies. But his self-imposed exile was also a form of suffering that few criminals endure. Some psychologists who have studied the case believe Darnell's inability to spend the money was less about fear of discovery and more about guilt, a subconscious need to punish himself, to make the crime not worth it in retrospect. The buried confession supports this theory, suggesting a man torn between self-preservation and a need for accountability. For law enforcement, the case is a reminder that justice sometimes takes unexpected forms. The confession wasn't discovered through brilliant detective work, but through random chance. A retiree with a metal detector, beach erosion, and the accumulated effect of time. It suggests that patient investigation, maintained databases, and the willingness to pursue old leads can eventually yield results. Even decades later, the $950,000 ransom, adjusted for inflation, would be worth approximately $2.1 million today. Darnell earned roughly $5.50 per hour as a janitor, working about 60 hours per week. Over 9 years, he earned approximately $154,000 in pre-tax wages from the Sandpiper Motor Lodge. He lived on far less than he earned, maintaining his minimal existence while the ransom money sat unused in storage. The mathematics of his decision, murder and extortion for wealth he never enjoyed, is a devastating calculation of futility.